Okay, hi everybody, Joy Forrest with Call to Peace Ministries. Today I have a special visitor. I'm here today with Danny Akin, who is the president of Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is my alma mater.
It makes me very proud.
And he was one of my teachers, and I remember him talking about things as I was coming through seminary, and in light of the Me Too movement and the Church Too movement, I believe that you have a lot that you could add to this conversation. So, we have been sitting here talking probably for the last 30 minutes about domestic violence in the church,
Right.
and you made some great statements that I wish I had had the camera turned on for. So, talking a little bit about, just the things that you've noticed in the last couple of years with all these things that have come out in the news.
Well, first of all, I grieve over what the news has revealed in terms of domestic abuse and what so many people, and almost always women, have endured and suffered. And yet God has the ability to bring good out of evil, and it has awakened, I think, the church and even our schools to just what is going on, how severe the problem is, and what it is that we can do to respond more biblically, but also more, and being biblical, more gracious and compassionately, because I think the church in the past, unintentionally, was a lot more rigid and maybe even legalistic in how it dealt with some of these issues, and as a result, instead of helping, we did more harm than good.
Amen. Well, I know that because I've been an advocate for the last 20 years, and I have seen a shift in the last year to 2 years. I've started seeing churches waking up and going, wait a minute, we could have done better.
Yes.
And as you said, even though they may have had good intentions, didn't turn out very well a lot of times.
No, I don't think there's any question that the churches, especially evangelical churches, were guided very much by their high view of marriage, and that marriage is indeed a sacred thing, a gift from God, and a desire then to see marriages saved and marriages kept together, driven by a goal for reconciliation. That's all good and admirable. But I think sometimes in our pursuit of that, we weren't listening as well to the pain and the suffering that spouses and children were enduring. We tended sometimes just to say, kind of suck it up and just, hang in there. And again, I realize there's a time in life for us to do those type of things, but there also comes a point where things are so painful, so hurtful, so harmful, that we have to take a different tact. And that then sometimes means making decisions that we wish we didn't have to make, but for the welfare of a mate and for the welfare of children, we have to make these decisions.
And so I'm really glad you're saying this. I know that the Southern Baptist Convention's come under some fire in recent months, and so I think that sometimes even our theology has played into that. But
Yes.
I'd like to see what you have to say about that. Let's talk about maybe the way the Southern Baptist Convention needs to move now.
Well, I do think that we have justifiably come under criticism because, again, though our intentions were good, we did not handle things well, and that's been exposed. Thankfully now we recognize that we need to approach the issue of domestic abuse differently. We need to be better listeners. We need to be more compassionate. We need to just simply have a different mindset about how we engage the whole issue. I'm grateful that our new president of the SBC, J.D. Greer, is appointing a task force to just look at how do we deal with domestic abuse. How do we, and this is painful for me, but how do we kind of have some type of potential database that will save churches future pain and suffering from men that on the surface look so good, so polished, they give all the right answers, but on the private side, there's a dark side that people don't know. I always say to folks, you never know what goes on behind closed doors, and you just don't know. I can think throughout my lifetime, Joy, of people that I thought on the surface gave every evidence of having a picture perfect marriage, only to discover that once they got behind closed doors, it was a hell on earth kind of situation. So you just don't know. And it's not always easy to get there and figure it out. But again, that means we work harder at this, we listen better, we come at it with an understanding that domestic abuse is far more pervasive than we thought. And therefore, we have a much more sympathetic ear to the cries of the hurting than perhaps we did in the past.
Amen. So one more question we talked about a little bit before, and I think that a lot of people think it's our theology, and I think it is a warping of our theology. So would you just talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it, because in recent months I've had people throw at us, well, the problem is your complementarian theology, where you believe that men have a headship responsibility, women are to be the meek, mild, submissive, almost voiceless servant. Well, let me just say right there, that's a caricature of the Bible. The Bible does, I believe, make it very clear that God calls men to a leadership assignment in the home. But it is the leadership of a servant. It is the leadership of a shepherd. Not a frustrated drill sergeant, not a CEO, but a servant. And so that's, first of all, the proper model for leadership. Secondly, submission doesn't mean that you allow yourself to be on the receiving end of abuse month after month, year after year. That is not what it means. And so we, again, have got to rethink what we understand is meant by complementarianism. And what I often say is I'm an advocate, Joy, of a kinder, gentler complementarianism, both in terms of how we think about it, but also in terms of how it fleshes itself out in the marriage relationship. And again, our theology was right in terms of what it was saying, but its orientation and its implementation, I think in too many instances, was flawed. And unfortunately, that opened the door for a lot of people to suffer a lot when it didn't have to happen.
Amen. I agree. Well, I appreciate that. I do remember sitting under your teaching